Hi, guys. So, today we're going to talk about interpersonal violence. Um, this is the third chapter of the three that you will be tested on, and the test is open. And I will leave it open until, like we talked, Monday night late, Tuesday morning. So you have time to take that. So, interpersonal violence is the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, or deprivation. So the occurrence of violation requires three things: it requires a perpetrator, a vulnerable person, and a crisis situation. Characteristics of a perpetrator: they consider their own needs more important than the needs of others. They typically have poor social skills. they they are extremely jealous, and they may control the family finance. Characteristics of a vulnerable person: this could be a pregnant lady. Pregnancy sometimes in situations is seen to be a trigger of violence. Persons younger than 3, someone that would remind the perpetrator of someone they don't like, a product of an unwanted pregnancy, poor physical or mental health, and dependent on the perpetrator. So a vulnerable person is oftentimes dependent on the perpetrator. So just some key terms: neglect is a failure to properly care for something. Physical abuse, any intentional act causing injury or trauma to another. Psychological abuse, emotional abuse, involves attempts to frighten, control, belittle, or isolate. And sexual abuse, sexual contact or behavior against someone who is not consensual. So there is what they call the cycle of violence, and it has 3 parts. The first part is tension, and this is actually also known sometimes as tension building. So during this stage, it's characterized by minor violence in the form of pushing or abusive verbalization, so more using words. The acute battering stage: this is the stage where the victim is beat or abused. And the honeymoon stage: this is characterized by kind, loving behaviors toward the abused person when the perpetrator feels remorseful. So, oftentimes, the perpetrator will fluctuate and cycle through between the tension building stage, the acute battering stage, and the honeymoon stage. Variations and context of interpersonal violence. I have all of those listed right there on the slide for you: child abuse and neglect, bullying, youth violence, intimate partner violence, older adult abuse and neglect, sexual violence, and psychological emotional maltreatment. So you can see those on that slide. Consequences of interpersonal violence: there's always the possibility of physical injury. This varies and is dependent on the physical nature of the trauma. Varying untoward physical manifestations can occur. Sexual trauma, again, this varies and is dependent on the age relationship, the age and relationship of the victim and the perpetrator, severity, the environment, and then the results of that sexual trauma. Is there an unintended pregnancy? Did the victim get an infection? That sort of thing. And then violence during pregnancy. This varies and may have detrimental effects on the mother and or the fetus. So it can affect not only the mama, but it can affect the baby as well. Consequences, and we'll continue on here, but mental health consequences, these vary and depend on whether the victim has Other precipitating factors such as, or precipitating conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or if they have depression, if they've made suicide attempts, that sort of thing. And then consequences of child abuse or neglect and youth violence. This this varies and depends on the type of neglect or abuse. It can result with developmental delays, childhood anxiety and depression, low self-esteem, eating disorders, and substance abuse. And then another consequence, the last one that I list on your slide there, is intentional or unintentional death from injury can occur in all populations. Risk factors. Populations at greatest risk. Honestly, I hate to even pinpoint one particular population. All persons are kind of at risk, regardless of their age, their gender, their race, ethnicity. Some individual risk factors: impaired physical or mental health, use or misuse of substance abuse, or golly, listen to me, use or misuse of substances or alcohol abuse, unemployment, economic stress. Those are all individual risk factors. So when taking a history, in order for us to be able to recognize when there's the possibility of violence going on, some things to think about is the history, it may be incomplete or inconsistent with the observed injuries. So maybe the bruises on this 4-year-old's arms and legs aren't coinciding with what mom and dad say happened that caused these bruises. Oftentimes the victims may be afraid to provide events, and they may not be able to recollect those events. They may not be able to give you a good history of those events. During examination, injuries can range from obvious to barely obvious. So sometimes we aren't able to see the injuries from violence that goes on in the home or in the hospital or in the nursing home if there's elder abuse going on. Injuries may manifest as old or new, so you may notice bruises in differing stages. The nurse should always be alert to unusual patterns of cuts, bruises, burns, and fractures. And take note of injuries not typically seen in the context of day-to-day living. So with that, I mean, my son, for example, Ian, he was always my one that constantly had bruises. So I picked him up. I worked when the boys were little at Burlington Children's Home, and my aunt babysat for me. I went to pick Ian up, and he came running down the sidewalk, tripped on his feet, and then just flipped head over rear end and just rolled on down the sidewalk. His face was bruised and had abrasions. It was all scun up. His little shoulder was bruised. He was a mess. So that was on a Friday evening. On Sunday, we were at my mom's house, and she had this little mini pool table. It was still very heavy. Ian tried to climb up on it and pulled it over and busted his head open, and we ended up having stitches put in his head. And when I took him to the hospital, they questioned me. They looked at this 3-year-old who was bruised from head to toe, and I'm telling them now that, he's got this this open wound on his forehead that he pulled the pool table. Well, they can see the bruises are in different stages and these different abrasions on him. So it sent up red flags, as it should. And I didn't take it personally, that they were questioning me, because that's our job. That's our job to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. And as a professional, as a nurse, you are mandated to report suspected child abuse. And that's your part in it. You do that. You pass on the torch. They come and investigate and, interview the parents and interview the child if they can, and keep an eye on it and make the decision as to whether, hey, this is legit, that, hey, this kid did seriously fall at the sitters Friday and now he's got his head busted open. Or, is the story not matching up? Does the child appear fearful of the parents? There's different little cues that you can kind of pick up on. Diagnostic tests. There are no specific diagnostic tests used to verify interpersonal violence. So there's no test that we can use that will indicate to us whether there's violence going on in the home or the facility. Whenever you have a patient that comes in with injuries, it's always important to provide those injuries in documentation form. So what I mean by that is it's never wrong to draw a picture. It's never wrong to include a diagram, or some places even have body maps. They have documentation body maps where you can draw on, so it just looks like it's got the head and the body and the legs and the arms, and then you can document. So if it's the left shoulder that there's a big abrasion noted on, you can actually draw it there, what it kind of looks like, and write out from it, that there's an abrasion there. If there's cigarette burns noted from a cigarette butt on the right knee, you can document that and draw a picture to show exactly where those burns were at. But this documentation oftentimes will be the basis for possible legal intervention. So it's always important, and I know you've heard me say before, your documentation, you want it to be perfect to the point. If in 5 years it's up on a big screen in a courtroom, you're not embarrassed of what it looks like, and you can read it and understand and remember exactly what you're talking about. So same goes with these body maps and documenting injuries. You want to make sure that later down the road, if you're ever called out on this, that you're able to verify. So the more documentation you have, the better. Collaborative care, this is important regardless of what the situation. So you always want to consider the interdisciplinary team, which would include your providers, can be nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, the MDs, the nurses, the social workers, the counselors or psychologists, and the chaplain. All important things to remember when considering the interdisciplinary team. Collaborative care, I also just want to talk about that we have to treat the underlying injury or injuries. All abuse needs to be reported. So any suspicious violence that you are noting needs to be reported. And it is a legal requirement. So you're legally required to report any questionable patients that you think may be the victim of violence. Refer the victim to a safe house. So let's talk for a minute about this, because I know that students before have had questions on their HESI, and they've also had questions when they set for their NCLEX about this. So I do think it's important to mention. If you're going to help a victim to plan to leave, first of all, you need to remember that when the time comes to depart, let's say it's a mom with 3 kids, and you're helping her to plan her departure. It has to be quick. So when she builds up the courage and she can see the light and see her way out, it will have to be a quick departure. She's not going to have a week to move things out and set up a new apartment across town and that sort of thing. If it's to the point that she feels that she's got to get out of the situation, it's going to have to be a quick departure. So some things to remember and some pointers to maybe give that mom would be to keep a cell phone fully charged. And why would that be? Why would it be important for her to have a way to communicate? She may have to get a hold of a safe house, or she may have to get a hold of her mom to help her out, or, she may have a close friend that she needs to check back with to know that she and the children are okay. But having a cell phone that is fully charged is very important. For the children, they should only take 1 to 2 small toys or a security object. If mom's having to get out and she's having to get out quick with 2 or 3 children or even 1 child, she needs to take the least amount of stuff that she has to take. The important part is getting her and the child out safe and keeping them alive and safe. So, one or two small toys or a safety security object, that might be like a blankie or maybe a little pillow that the child has had since they were teeny tiny, and that's just something that is their security thing that they hold on to for security. Another thing would be to gather important documents to take with her. So that could be like the birth certificate, social security cards, any important documents that she's not going to want to have to go back to the perpetrator's home to go get. Medications. If the mom takes medications or the children take medications, mom needs to make sure when she up and leaves that she's got enough to get her through at least a couple days to a week. Important phone numbers, and that could be like for the shelter or the safe house that you're going to help her find, any support persons, that sort of thing. She could write those numbers down on a little index card that she could fold up and keep down in her pocketbook hidden. She also, something important to talk to and educate the mom about, or I keep saying mom, but maybe it's dad. Maybe it's a dad that that is the victim of abuse, and dad's going to have to make his getaway. They also need to have a key word to signal the children that, hey, it's time to go. So maybe they're going to plan that, when the perpetrator comes home and, maybe he's a drinker and he drinks and he gets drunk and he passes out, that's when we're going to make our break, and when we're going to make our getaway. So they need to come up with a word that mom can say and the children know, hey, I just heard pineapple. Now I know it's time to go. That's safer for mom or the dad, whatever the victim. That's safer for the victim. Because if the victim's having to say, Johnny, come on, we're going to leave now, even if the perpetrator is passed out, they may still be with it enough that they're hearing some of this. So a secret code word is always important for them to have. Primary prevention. So we talked when we did our HESI review a little bit about primary, secondary, and tertiary. So I just wanted to throw this in here. So primary prevention, the education is designed to reduce the rates of violence. And of course, there's various forms of violence. So we want to focus in and keen in on those and educate to try to reduce the rates of violence. The focus is on the individual, the community, and making changes so that violence is less likely or less severe. Secondary, this would be the early intervention in abusive situations to minimize their disability or long-term effects. And tertiary, this is where we're going to facilitate the healing process. We're going to provide support, assist survivors of the violence to achieve their optimal level of safety, health, and well-being. So primary, we're going to attempt to make changes in the individual and the community to reduce the rates of violence. Secondary, early intervention in the abusive situations, and we do these to minimize their disability or long-term effects. And tertiary, we're facilitating healing. We're providing support. Remember, this is the one that I said we're going to get them back. We're going to get them as good as we can get them. So we're assisting those survivors of violence to achieve their optimal level of safety, health, and well-being. When interviewing a person for possible abuse, the nurse, you have to be non-threatening. You have to come across as non-threatening, non-judgmental. So an abused person, a victim, is not likely to open up to anyone, let alone someone that they feel is intimidating. Why would that be? Because they've lived and breathed intimidation while they've been at the mercy of their perpetrator. So the nurse has got to come across and be empathetic. So, those empathetic remarks that we make help to develop rapport. Patients can sense that in us, and they can hear that in us in the way we talk to them, with our tone and our choice of words. Questions that require discussion are less threatening and will provide more information than asking yes and no questions. So that's important to remember. All right, guys. I feel that if you review your notes that you've done through listening to the lectures and the lectures that we did in class and have done your reading, you'll have no problem with the exam. Like I said, it is open. It's on Blackboard, so you just have to log in there. Once you start it, you do have to finish it. And you also have the practice questions up there, which I would encourage you to work on over the weekend. So we will not meet on Monday because you have Mr. Sykes' HESI exam. So you'll come in at that scheduled time and take your HESI. I will be continually recording lectures for you so that you can be listening to those. And then on Tuesday, we are going to go ahead at 9:30 and have class as scheduled. And Wednesday, we're going to do class. We'll do from 9:30 to 11, and then we will have lunch break, and then we'll pick back up in the afternoon for an hour and a half, 2 hours, working on HESI review. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I will be happy to entertain any questions that you have. I hope you have a blessed, wonderful weekend, and we will see you back Monday. Good luck, guys.